If you really don't care about this introduction, skip to the Layer 1 chapter, or this timecode if you're a phone user. Hey everyone, Tenbond here. Fans of the channel will know that my modus operandi is to be incredibly late to a trend. However, when I do come to a trend, I try to make it worth your while to watch, and on top of that, there's plenty of material to work with. Now, make no mistake here, this isn't an empty attempt to jump on a trend. I am a genuine fan of the Iceberg memes. I find them to be a very good way to give people a bite-sized version of topics that often have deep and complex details, giving viewers the motivation to look into it more on their own. However, I won't mind the probable boost of viewership this might bring. This is the first Iceberg I've ever done. Might be the only one I do, I don't know. If you like this one, feel free to recommend others you think would be interesting to research. Now, no doubt the Iceberg topics of this video have been covered on dozens of other channels, capitalizing on the meme. However, if you're as picky as I am about the presenters you or I listen to on YouTube, then you'll feel the same way when I say that not all Iceberg videos are watchable. Of course, the first Iceberg video I'm doing is about my favorite topic: long-term dread-inducing societal changing and/or world-ending events. Have fun! Please note, there will be some controversial topics on this list pertaining to politics and religion. I'm going to cover them as unbiased as I can, despite my own opinions on them, which I won't be sharing. This Iceberg is also a recreation of one I found on Reddit that I could not find the author to, so whoever it is, all credit goes to them. However, I did make some changes to it, mostly rearranging some of the entries and combining several that were literally the same exact thing. Most of the information in this video is adapted from the wiki entries I could find on them. Most of the credit goes there. At this top layer, most of these subjects are so well known, Hollywood uses them as cannon fodder for disaster movies. Climate change. Or, if you're as old as I am, it used to be called global warming. Or, if you're older than me, used to be called a new ice age. Is the idea that due to human actions such as mass industrialization and the overuse of fossil fuels, that Earth's atmosphere is being polluted to the point that eventually life will be unable to continue. Whether due to the sheer uncleanliness of the air, water, and land, or due to trapped heat from the sun, or both, Earth's surface will become a wasteland incapable of supporting life. The idea of climate change itself has been subject to change throughout the last 50 to 60 years. In the 70s, due to a previous trending lowering of global temperature, there was some speculation that air pollution was causing sunlight to be blocked from reaching Earth's surface. However, beginning in the 80s, global temperatures were seen to be on the rise, which led many to conclude that air pollution was actually causing a greenhouse-like effect, hence greenhouse gases. Heat from the sun was being trapped, rather than being blocked. Of course, climate change is a widely debated topic, whether it's truly being caused by human actions or if it's a natural cycle, or if it's even real at all. Whatever your opinions of it are, I'm sure you'll let us all know in the comments. Overpopulation is the concept that Earth is becoming too crowded, and eventually will reach a point where the population size becomes too large for the planet to support in terms of resources. Some believe we've already reached that point, hence the poverty and starvation happening in places all over the world. With finite resources, even first world nations will eventually reach an end to what can be extracted from the planet. Population size causes a higher demand of resources, which means more extraction, which means faster depletion. The Industrial Revolution caused a massive spike in human population due to increase of resource availability. There was another population spike in the 1950s with better medical technology and agriculture. Was humanity ready for such a population spike, or has it set us up for a future resource shortage and probable war for control of them? We'll find out. You are now unfortunately aware of peak oil, if you weren't already. One of the biggest immediate fears from outer space is an asteroid impact. The dinosaurs. Russia. Russia again. The asteroid the game Rage was based on. That new one that has a 2% chance of hitting us. Which actually means it has a 98% chance of hitting us, but that's not as eye-catching for headlines. Asteroid collisions at our current point in time could be what sets us back to the Stone Age, or just sterilizes the surface of the planet. With few defensive measures even capable with our current technology, this is one of the biggest external threats to our planet right now. The rapture is an event described within the book of Revelations in which Jesus returns to earth and all members of the church, living and dead, will be taken to heaven. Depending on particular beliefs, this event has some variations. Pre-tribulation states that the rapture will occur before the 7 years of tribulation, whereas the second coming of Christ will happen after that period. Mid-tribulation, as the name implies, states that the rapture will occur at some point during tribulation. Post-tribulation, of course, states that the rapture will occur after the tribulation period. Now, some believe that the events of Revelations is referring to the Roman Emperor Nero and his actions against Jerusalem at the time. It's also widely debated whether the events of Revelation are to be taken literal or symbolically. Now, I will let it be known here, I am Christian, so this entry holds some bias for me. However, this is all I'm going to cover with this entry because this is an entire video on its own, for someone else to handle, and I really don't feel like getting super theological here. Oh, this is going to be a fun one. Viral and bacterial pandemics have been in human lexicon for thousands of years, as far back as the Bible with the oftentimes mentioned leprosy, to the Black Plague of the mid-century, and even as early as COVID-19. This is where I might be able to introduce some people to the really fun and increasingly realistic concept of superbugs, bacteria and/or viruses that are highly resistant to medication. In fact, there are already natural cases of certain bacteria that are showing serious resistance to even some of the more extensive antibacterial medications. For some extra fun, we'll throw in bioweapons. With CRISPR being able to do editing of DNA, we can now create our own bacteria and viruses, ones designed to spread incredibly fast, lay dormant to avoid the host recognizing they're infected, then after a replication period, it hits fast and kills the host. If you've ever played Metal Gear Solid 5, the vocal cord parasite, while a completely fictional bioweapon, is an example of engineered organisms that are created to target a specific population. However, real-life examples are readily abundant. 1155, Emperor Barbossa poisons water wells with human bodies. Tortona, Italy. 1346, Mongols catapult bodies of plague victims over the city walls of Kaffa, Crimean Peninsula. 1495, Spanish mix wine with blood of leprosy patients to sell to their French foes. Naples, Italy. 1650, Polish fire saliva from rabid dogs towards their enemies. 1797, Napoleon floods the plains around Mantua, Italy, to enhance the spread of malaria. 1863, Confederates sell clothing from yellow fever and smallpox patients to Union troops, USA. So all we did today was upgrade our methods of spreading it. Pop culture latched onto zombies like they were going out of stock. Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, 28 days later, 28 weeks later, 28 years later, Shaun of the Dead, COD Zombies, I Am Legend, Rec, Rec 2, Rec 3, Rec 4, Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3, Halo, Halo 2, Halo 3, The Walking Dead comic, The Walking Dead TV show, The Walking Dead video game, Last of Us 2, Left 4 Dead 2, World War Z, Dead Rising 2, Dead Rising 3, Dead Island 2, Dying Light, and Dying Light 2. The idea is that a bacteria, or usually a virus, infects a host, kills off the higher reasoning of the human brain, and only leaves a shambling, flesh-craving husk behind. Of all the things that could end society, this is not one of them. This is the only entry that I'm going to completely deny, because it's not going to offend anyone if I do, unless you're pro-zombie rights or something like that. Think about the complexity it takes for our brains to have the motor functions that it does. No virus on Earth has shown the ability to both kill off our higher brain function, but leave behind the ability to walk and eat. Rabies is the closest that comes to that, causing hydrophobia. However, those infected with rabies do not become ravenous, shambling corpses with the desire to consume flesh. I know, Last of Us, and that fungus that controls ants. I know you want to fantasize about being the king of the zombie waste, but it just isn't going to happen. Zombies are fun, but the diseases we have on Earth, they won't be the ones to do it. Year 2000. It was believed that due to a computing issue, that when the date rolled over to the year 2000, that computers would see the last two digits of 00 and think it's 1900, which would cause havoc all over the world, with dates being out of alignment, bank systems would crash, planes would fall out of the sky, and all debt would cease to exist. Hey, that's pretty cool. Well, none of that happened. You still owe a lot of money. Now, that computer bug was real, and did cause some issues with some companies. However, it was nowhere near as widespread or as disastrous as the media fear-mongering made it to be. Go watch the Internet Historian's video on it. To age me quite a bit, I was born in '96. I would have been only about 3 during Y2K, and I have a very, very vague memory of it. But what I do recall from it is when the clock hit 12 a.m. on January 1st, 2000, my parents turned off the circuit breaker as a prank. Of all the threats on this list, nuclear war is the one that humanity has had the most brushes with since the 1940s. To give you perspective, at no time before then in human history did we have the power to sterilize the surface of our planet. Fast forward to the arms race of the Cold War, and the story has changed. Between just the US and Russia, there are enough nuclear weapons to scorch the surface multiple times. One of the only things that keeps all of this at bay is the idea of mutually assured destruction. Now, nuclear war itself is a problem, but the aftermath would be possibly worse, what with radiation spread, potential nuclear winter from the massive fires that would rage after the blast, dealing with a pre-industrial society when you're used to post-industrialism as well. There's a reason people say the lucky ones don't survive the blast. If you've got that uranium fever, just go play some Fallout. I assume this is talking about the idea of the polar ice caps melting and causing mass flooding of coastal areas. Whether through climate change, nuclear war, or maybe an asteroid impact, it's speculated that if the ice caps were to melt rapidly, that ocean levels would significantly rise, causing mass flooding, turning a lot of inland areas into beachfront property. And I guess a lot of people would end up underwater or something like that. I don't know. I didn't hate Waterworld, so... Entries in this level are still well known within the public knowledge. However, their mechanism of operation have more nuance than many on the first layer. You all no doubt know about this one. There was a whole movie made about it. December 21st, 2012. The day the Earth was supposed to end. You know, like how it was supposed to end multiple times before 2012 as well. Well, you see, in 2012, a massive solar flare was supposed to happen, which would wipe out all electronics on Earth and send us back to the Dark Ages. No, wait, hold on. The magnetic poles were supposed to shift, which would do... something. No, wait, hold on. Earthquakes were supposed to happen all across the world, reducing everything to rubble. No, hold on 1 second, the studio's handing me some new information. Oh yeah, that's right. The rapture was supposed to occur. Maybe? No one actually knew what was supposed to happen on the super spooky repeating numbers of 12, 21, 12. Because this was all based on archaeologists reading a Mayan calendar and noticing that it ended on what they apparently wrongfully calculated as 2012. Of course, at this point, everyone should know by now that Mayan calendars aren't about end of the world, but end of cycles. Whatever that means. Anyways, world didn't end. We're all still here. For now. There's an entry on the same level called Financial Collapse, which I'm going to once again just pair with this one since they are very, very closely related. This is a topic I am morbidly kind of obsessed with. In my writing prompt videos, many of the short stories I wrote had to do with various types of societal collapses. The general idea is that some event, whether it is a sudden thing or happens over time, causes human society as we know it to crash. Games like Fallout, Half-Life, Destiny, movies such as most zombie films, Transcendence, and a few others I can't think of at the moment, deal with this concept. Things like economic crashes, diseases, celestial body impact, nuclear or civil war, Or, in a more modern sense, an EMP that wipes out the power grid long term could cause society to completely collapse and put us back into the Wild West. Humanity would return to a trade and barter economy again. The Amish would survive something like this the easiest. A financial collapse has some more nuance to it, though, having to deal with the stock market, global trade, and central banking systems. But just know that if all that goes down, it all goes down. Of course, with technology having progressed to the state it has, anything less than nuclear war would not set us back too badly. In the event of an economic, pandemic, or civil war-related social collapse, current infrastructure would allow us to have a post-industrial starting point to come back from. Indoor plumbing and electricity are fairly self-contained systems now within modern residences that can be restored with some know-how. So long as there's not a mass die-off of people with trade skills, our return to pre-collapse would happen fairly quickly. Ironically, societal collapse in this day and age, so long as our infrastructure isn't wiped out by nuclear war or some kind of substantially sized asteroid, comet, or rogue planet impacting us, we would make it. Even in a pandemic, barring an extraterrestrial disease, with our knowledge of hygiene and sterilization, it wouldn't destroy us completely. This is probably the most hopeful entry on the list. Let's fix that. Now, this has a lot of different ways it could go down. Any species that could invade us would dominate us with ease. The ability to do interstellar travel with any sort of convenience puts you hundreds, if not thousands of years beyond human technology. It wouldn't be a fight. It would be an extermination. Think of War of the Worlds, but they don't die from the common cold. Speaking of which, if an alien bacteria, virus, or parasite, if even adaptable to mammalian life, would probably kill all animal life on Earth. An alien invasion from a race with interstellar travel would be like current humanity trying to take on the Federation from Star Trek. There's another entry in the Iceberg about volcanic winter, which I'm just going to cover in this as well. While supervolcanoes are a generalized idea, I'll be focusing on the most popular supervolcano we have, Yellowstone. Many scientists believe that if Yellowstone were to erupt, it would devastate the entire planet. Those within the immediate area of Yellowstone would be dead, plain and simple. Those far enough away from the blast zone would be subject to massive ash fallout, black snow, which would be very harmful to breathe. This is also where you get the volcanic winter, which is believed to have actually happened in Europe in the early 1800s due to the eruption of Mount Tambora. Despite this being an American volcano, Europe still gets screwed as well. They would suffer from the toxic gases released from the eruption, as well as some of the ash cloud. There was a fairly decent made-for-TV movie about this topic on the Discovery Channel years ago. It is on YouTube, and I will link it if it is still up. For this entry, I'm assuming that they mean if terrorists got their hands on nuclear weapons, which would result in nuclear war. If several terroristic cells could detonate nukes in multiple areas within a nation like the US, it would cripple our grid, which would cause a good old-fashioned civil collapse. This entry could also include things like biological or chemical weapons being deployed by terrorists as well. Small entry, but there isn't much more to say about this than what I've already covered. It's just about who does it, rather than what it is. I assume this entry is referring to the AI singularity, such as in Terminator, rather than a black hole. The idea is that humanity loses control of AI and technology in general, which rapidly self-progresses to a point of superintelligence, and no longer views humanity as valuable. The endpoint of this is an AI takes over the nuclear arsenal of the world and causes global annihilation. If you've seen Terminator, that's what I'm talking about. Matrix is also a consideration, where humanity is enslaved by a near all-powerful AI system, trapping mankind in a digital world, using their bodies as batteries, or in the original idea of the Matrix, processing power. Working off the last one, if we do live in a simulated reality, there are two ways this could end the world. Either it's the end of the world as we know it, we're in a Matrix-style simulation where we have a real body but our minds live in a simulation, or we ourselves are just a simulation, like Sims are in their game, and when the power switches off, we cease to exist. There are a few things that disprove simulation theory. One of these is pi, being potentially an infinite number sequence. If it really is endless, that means it would require, at a certain point, infinite storage space to contain the entire string of numbers, which is endless, so it can't be contained. Of course, you can argue that we live in more of a symbolic simulation rather than literal. Plato's cave is a good way of understanding the symbolic simulation. We aren't in a computer program, we aren't fictional characters in some video game. Rather, the world around us is built on false narratives. The simulation in this case means we find out the truth of the world around us, who the people in charge are, and what they're doing to us. Entries here start to delve into knowledge that many people are aware of, but hold details that deepen their impact. I'm going to assume this means solar flares. A solar flare is an emission of electromagnetic radiation from the sun. It says it right there in the wiki article I'm using as a source. When solar flares impact Earth, they're absorbed by the atmosphere and the magnetic field. We are normally safe from them. The most they cause issues with are shortwave radio signals. However, some fear that there could be a freak instance of a solar flare that is so powerful it could disrupt all technology on Earth. And, it almost happened. July 23rd, 2012. Yeah, that 2012. A huge coronal mass ejection was produced from the sun, and by all accounts, would have crippled our technological infrastructure. But what saved us from this? Well, it didn't happen a week later. Yeah, that's how close we came, everyone. The ejection did come within Earth's orbit, but the planet wasn't in the way as it passed. So far, other than the Cold War, this entry is the only other thing on the list that has nearly happened. Feels good, doesn't it? A gamma-ray burst is considered to be one of the most energetic solar events in the known universe. Normally released during a supernova, gamma-ray bursts are, as the name suggests, high-energy bursts of gamma rays, with an afterglow of X-rays, ultraviolet, optical, infrared, microwave, and radio frequencies. GRBs can last anywhere from milliseconds to hours. So far, they've only occurred outside of our galaxy, which is obviously good because long-range bursts would have little effect on our planet. Same can't be said if it happened relatively close. The effects of a close-range burst would cause chemical reactions in the atmosphere, such as producing nitrogen oxide and nitrogen dioxide. This could cause a depletion of the ozone layer, allowing dangerous levels of UV light, as well as creating a photochemical smog, which would block out the sun, causing a global cooling effect and seriously affecting plant life. Now, this would only last a few years, but they would not be an enjoyable few years. I'm not entirely sure what this entry is about. I speculate that it means that evolution happens rapidly for some reason, either to us or the animal and plant life on Earth. If it happens to humans, it could result in our biology changing to such an extreme version relative to what we are now that we're incapable of coping with it. Or that animal and plant life evolve to a far more dangerous point and humanity is put on a lower level on the food chain. If this entry is actually about something else, let me know in the comments. I believe this entry is referring to humanity merging with technology and the potential disasters that could result from it. Cyberpunk 2077 actually has a lot of good ideas in terms of ways cybernetics could be a serious issue. Cyberpsychosis, people who have pre-existing psychotic tendencies, which becomes compounded by their cybernetic implants. A loss of the self, resulting in a violent urge to kill those they view as weak. As well as this, one can lose their mind inside the net, their body becoming an empty vessel. What is left of their personality now only exists on the net, or in Johnny Silverhand's case, a brain chip. Deus Ex Human Revolution also contains a version of cybernetic issues, such as the need of anti-augmentation rejection medication, and also, spoilers, at the end of the game, it's revealed that the Illuminati injected a virus into people's augmentations during a worldwide glitch, which prompted people to get their cybernetics fixed, unknowingly getting a malicious program injected into their systems as well. Once activated, all those affected became violent and attacked anyone on sight. Biotech disaster could also be referring to genetically engineered diseases or nanomachines, which will be covered in this iceberg. This one was a complete mystery to me. Flood basalt, or basalt, is the result of a giant volcanic eruption or series of eruptions that covers large stretches of land or the ocean floor with basalt lava. Based off that, what I assume this entry is talking about is an apocalyptic level of this material engulfs major land masses and destroys human society. Probably a Pompeii event. Because I'm not entirely sure what this entry is trying to get at, if you know, let me know. A black hole probably doesn't need any introduction. A spatial body that has such an intense gravitational pull that even light cannot escape. Naturally formed black holes are very far away from us, and so far, the only way to make them is from a collapsing star. At this point in time, we do not have the capabilities to create black holes ourselves. But damn it, we are trying. Of course, the problem is creating one of substantial size on Earth. It's known that if you were to create a microscopic black hole, that it would dissipate nearly within the same instance it was formed. Its gravitational pull would have little to no effect on its immediate surroundings. However, if one formed of large enough size, and by that I mean like the size of a marble, Earth is done. Here, entries reside in the realm of partial obscurity, easily researchable, but not as common knowledge as it could be. Some hypothetical, many theoretical, some are all too real. First coined by K. Eric Drexler in 1986, this is the idea that with the creation of nanomachines, especially self-replicating ones, that this would result in the machines consuming all resources in their vicinity to create more of themselves, eating away at physical infrastructure, people, animals, plants, etc. Anything that could be used to create more of the machines would be torn down and repurposed for the collective. Imagine such a replicator floating in a bottle of chemicals, making copies of itself. The first replicator assembles a copy in 1,000 seconds. The 2 replicators then build 2 more in the next 1,000 seconds. The 4 build another 4, and the 8 build another 8. At the end of 10 hours, there are not 36 new replicators, but over 68 billion. In less than a day, they would weigh a ton. In less than 2 days, they would outweigh the Earth. In another 4 hours, they would exceed the mass of the Sun and all the planets combined. If the bottle of chemicals hadn't run dry long before. I'm not sure what this is referring to, but I speculate it's talking about a children of men type situation, where one or both sexes become incapable of procreation. Of course, this means the population is not being replaced by younger members of itself, and eventually would lead to human extinction. Watch the movie, it's good. This could be referring to some speculations from articles a few years back claiming that the Y chromosome was going extinct. You know, in millions of years. This is based on the observation that the Y chromosome is shrinking compared to the X chromosome, slowly. Of course, in a few million years, none of the people claiming this will be around for future generations to call them out on jumping the gun claiming males won't exist. We'll see. I have an orbital knowledge of this concept, but it has a ton of different ideas depending on your religion or spiritual beliefs. As such, this one is going to be a bit short, as there is a lot of nuance to it that I cannot cover in an iceberg. In many belief sets, perceived planetary alignments are believed to signify things like spiritual connections, dimensional openings, and many, many other things, including, of course, end of the world. Some spiritual sects have in-depth meaning depending on your birth and where a planet was located during your time of birth. Again, this is a whole video on its own that someone else has probably covered with far better knowledge than I have, or am willing to do for an Iceberg video. Finally, an entry that I know full well what the creator is talking about. In several billion years, it's calculated that the Andromeda Galaxy, our closest galactic neighbor, will collide with our own and form one giant galaxy. Mind you, when I say closest, that is in celestial terms. If you think this is close, you really do have a massive ego. The Andromeda Galaxy is heading towards us at an estimated 68 miles or 110 kilometers per second. That might sound fast, but a mile compared to a light year, let alone 2.537 million of them, is a long ways away. And knowing how much I procrastinate on editing, I should have just enough time to finish this video before the collision. This pertains to the concept that as the universe expands, it will eventually reach a point where it has no more energy potential, and thermodynamic equilibrium would be the constant. The idea first came from William Thomson, the guy who they somehow named the Kelvin temperature scale after. Helping to formulate the first and second law of thermodynamics, he speculated on the greater scale of thermodynamics of the universe. The result would inevitably be a state of universal rest and death, if the universe were finite and left to obey existing laws. But it is impossible to conceive a limit to the extent of matter in the universe, and therefore science points rather to an endless progress through an endless space of action involving the transformation of potential energy into palpable motion and hence into heat, than to a single finite mechanism running down like a clock and stopping forever. As far as I'm concerned, my feet and hands experience heat death every single winter. Somewhat the opposite of universal heat death, rather than the idea of everything spreading out to a state of equilibrium, the Big Crunch, dating back to 1922, speculates that the universe will reverse its outward expansion and crush down into a single point. One of the original ideas that supported this concept, before it had a name, was Richard Bentley in a letter to Isaac Newton. If we're in a finite universe and all stars attract each other together, would they not all collapse to a singular point? And if we're in an infinite universe with infinite stars, would infinite forces in every direction not affect all of those stars? Of course, this was before it was known that stars are in motion as well. One theory about the Big Crunch is that it is a part of a cycle known as the Big Bounce. Consistent naming convention here. This collapse of the universe back down to an incredibly dense point would rebound back and cause another Big Bang, and that perhaps the original Big Bang was the result of a prior Big Crunch. Please divert any jokes about the Big Bang Theory TV show to a different comment section. This one is fairly easy to understand how this would end the world. Supernovas, of course, are caused by exploding stars, usually either formed by massive stars or white dwarfs experiencing runaway nuclear fusion. The supernova is one of several possible events that can happen to a dying star. It can either collapse into a neutron star, black hole, or destroy itself, supernova, and form a diffuse nebula. Of course, with that much energy output, a supernova happening anywhere relatively near Earth would wipe out the planet, possibly even destroying it completely. If you've been around some circles of conspiracies, you may have heard of Planet X, Planet 9, or, in this case, Nibiru. Theories range far and wide what this planet is, and what it, or its inhabitants, if it contains any, are, and what it could do to Earth, if it is in fact real. Starting in the mid-90s, after a post from Nancy Leader on her website, Zeta Talk, she claimed that she was contacted by extraterrestrials via brain implant. Apparently, she was chosen to warn humanity that a planet-sized object would be flying through the inner solar system in 2003. This would cause the Earth to suffer from a magnetic pole shift, destroying most of humanity in the process. Nibiru was also supposed to be the reason for the 2012 doomsday prediction by many, so that can get added to the list. In 2017, Planet X had its approach date renewed by self-proclaimed Christian numerologist David Meade, believing it to be connected to several elements of Revelations. David gave the world an expiration date of October 2017, and when that didn't happen, logic dictated that instead it be moved to September 23rd, presumably of 2018. I'm going to go out on a real sturdy limb and assume that it didn't happen, given the date of scripting this section is February 20th, 2025. Nibiru has also been confused often with an entry further down on the list, Nemesis Star. Planet X is also the planet many claim the Anunnaki are from, a race of deities that show up in Sumerian writings and hieroglyphics. This entry pertains to the idea of extinction of various species on the planet, whether due to natural die-off or hunting them to extinction. By some estimates, 6% of land mammals have gone extinct in the last 130,000 years. However, according to scientists, more than 50% of mammalian food chain links have vanished. It doesn't take a scientist to know that the food chain collapsing is a bad thing. Whether or not this is fear-mongering or an actual crisis probably won't be realized until it doesn't happen or it's too late. So eat that burger while you still can. Incredibly similar to the Big Crunch, Bounce, and Bang, this is yet another hypothetical end of the universe. However, instead of heat death sucking itself back in and or bouncing back out, the Big Rip is far more devastating. In this theory, the expansion of the universe leads to all matter, even to the fundamental elements such as space-time, are torn apart, and space between individual particles reaches nigh infinite distances. This theory is somewhat supported by the standard model of cosmology, stating that the scale factor of the universe is accelerating. For the layman, like me, that means the universe is spreading out at an increasingly fast rate. So this entry may have some truth to it. I don't know. We'll see. Here, entries now reside in the realm of obscure science fiction, though most have real science behind them. Combining this with a originally further down entry of the moon being destroyed, not only do we know what would happen to Earth if the moon left its orbit, or was destroyed, we know that it's happening too. To start, the moon is in fact getting farther away from us. You know, a whopping 3.8 centimeters per year. Granted, by the time the moon would actually leave Earth's orbit, the sun will have already engulfed our planet in its expansion and contraction phase, 7 or so billion years from now. The moon is responsible for the rising and receding of tides on Earth. Our days would become slightly shorter and night would be in permanent new moon level of light. So, none. Now, the long-term effects are far worse. Major temperature shifts due to Earth's axis being thrown off, slowly but surely. Meteor impacts would happen far more often without the moon's gravity to steer their trajectory off target. Now, if the moon was destroyed, we'd get all the same issues, but with the added bonus of massive debris from it being pulled in by Earth's gravity. Once again, I'm combining this entry with another one about alien race assimilation. Whether through human-created technology or an alien race, this theory states that humanity could be consumed by technology in a way that we become a part of a collective. If you've ever seen the movie Transcendence, that's what it's getting at. If you know the Borg from Star Trek, that could either be us in the future or an alien race that finds Earth and takes it into the hive mind. Similarly, the Reapers from Mass Effect, or the Flood from Halo, though while not technological in nature, can interface with tech on a biological level. Despite this being covered briefly in the Mayan prophecy and Nibiru, there are some nuances to this that makes it deserve its own entry. Earth's magnetic field is created by its spinning molten iron core. This magnetic field is what protects the planet from a whole lot of spatial problems. Solar winds being one of the biggest threats that it shields us from. Solar winds that would destroy the ozone layer, allowing dangerous levels of UV radiation to bombard the surface. A magnetic pole shift sounds much worse than it probably is. We won't be getting tectonic plates rising out of the ocean because north and south flip. Though it will be pretty confusing when north on your compass leads you to Antarctica. Now, pole shifts do happen, quite frequently, if you consider over thousands of years to be frequent. However, in today's age, its effects wouldn't be apocalyptic. Various orbital systems would have some issues, power grids would fluctuate, you'd get a suntan easier, and birds would fly weird. We would survive a pole shift, even if it was a sudden one. It would be interesting, but survivable. Unlike, say, the core suddenly solidifying. Speaking of which, this would be far more of a world ender than a pole shift. The magnetic field would collapse, and all those problems I told you about it protecting us from now have an open gate to cause issues. Plate tectonics suddenly do pull a Roland Emmerich on us. Massive earthquakes everywhere from the sudden pause of momentum from the core. Massive global cooling from lack of internal heat. Earth's rotation would also slow down significantly after millions of years, which means one side of the planet gets cooked, the other side freezes. Of course, like a lot of the other entries on this list, this scenario is complete fiction in the current day, but an actual possibility in the far, far off future. Just don't lose sleep over this one. This topic is going to combine demographic meltdown as well as antinatalism. Mass insanity could also be considered mass hysteria, but insanity sounds more extreme and therefore worse. The thing about this entry is, it's happened before. Well, at least the mass hysteria part. Some examples include a nun in the 1700s who bit her fellow nuns, and the behavior spread to her colleagues and other covenants across Germany, Holland, and Italy. An 1844 book detailing another covenant of nuns who began meowing like cats, which continued until threats of police whipping them. One of the more popular cases of mass hysteria, known as dancing mania, July of 1518. Numerous people began inexplicably dancing for days. There are plenty of examples I could give of today, many dealing with politics and religion. I would argue that things like Y2K in 2012 were cases of mass hysteria, or mass insanity. I personally unironically consider the brain rot being spread by TikTok and how many people fall for the various scams being pushed on there to be a form of mass insanity. Humanity has shown time and time again, no matter the level of technology, no matter the access to information, to fall into herd mentality and create a panic out of nothing. Get the right kind of panic, and you could see people ending their own lives en masse. Convinced that terminating their own existence is a way to transcend or to take the easy way out in fear of something far worse coming along. We've already seen this in several cults. People willing to take their own lives in massive numbers because their leader convinced them it was the only way forward. To touch on the antinatalism, if humanity gradually or suddenly loses its will to procreate, well, that means no more humans being born, which means the future ends once the youngest member finally dies. Is it possible for a cult, fear-mongering campaign, or the threat of a disease to convince us to cease procreation? In some groups, yes, we already see it. Perpetual darkness reigns. These topics are only known to those who deliberately seek them out. Caution is advised. At the moment, this entry resides in science fiction, but not far off science fiction. An alternate name you might be more familiar with is Rods from God. And in fact, this is the premise of not only Call of Duty Ghosts, but also a weapon used in the second live-action G.I. Joe movie. The idea is that one or more governments place weaponized satellites in orbit, containing telephone pole-sized rods, or larger, of tungsten metal. Using gravity to accelerate these projectiles into the surface of the planet, the sheer kinetic force brought with these poles would result in near-nuclear levels of devastation, but without the radiation. At least that's what Hollywood thinks they'll do. But in more disappointing reality, while these rods would be traveling at incredibly fast speeds, making them difficult to defend against, their relative level of destruction is calculated to be less of, and more so. Their use is more so for destroying underground targets, rather than causing a localized earthquake. This is just real. Genetically modified crops. Look on the packaging of your food. It may say that it contains genetically modified organisms. Now, you might be wondering, how could this be used as an end of the world, or at least end of humanity method? Pretty simple. Just throw some genetics into the food that causes mutations within anything that eats it. Mass cancer. Or throw in a gene that causes the consumer to become sterilized. Or throw in a gene that causes cognitive impairment. Or throw in a gene that shuts off your immune system. Look into CRISPR. This stuff isn't science fiction anymore. Moving back to religion, blood moon prophecies pertaining to the predictions made by Christian preachers John Hagee, I'm not sure, hopefully I'm pronouncing one of those right, and Mark Blitz. Their predictions stated that during a series of full moons occurring between 2014 and 15, and also coinciding with several Jewish holidays, that this was the beginning of the end times prophesied in Revelations. Now, there is some biblical reference to blood moons, such as the book of Joel. The sun will turn into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Of course, total solar eclipses and blood moons get hyped up all the time in religious circles every single instance they occur. We're still here, so I think Hagee, and Blitz were wrong. I'm going to be combining false vacuum decay and quantum vacuum collapse since this is all sort of related. A quantum vacuum is a theorized quantum state of lowest possible energy, containing no particles and is often referred to as a zero-point field. The idea is that if a region of space or a bubble of this state of quantum physics reaches this state of base-level stability, that it could cause a chain reaction, spreading across the universe, possibly resulting in all of reality as we know it, literally ceasing to exist. Named after the author Jules Verne, the Verne shot is a hypothetical volcanic eruption caused by massive buildup of gases under Earth's crust. This eruption is theoretically powerful enough to eject not only gaseous materials into a suborbital level, but also large masses of the surrounding land, which would result in atmospheric darkening as well as debris impacting the surface. While most believe an asteroid is responsible for the 3 to 50 megaton explosion reported in Russia in 1908, some propose it was a Verne shot rather than an asteroid. It is also theorized by some to be the explanation for several extinction events on Earth. I can't find any solid information on this, but going off my own knowledge of various topics related to it, I think what this entry is talking about is either humanity puts itself into a long-term cryostasis, or some kind of ecological event causes a mass freezing of the planet. Or the entry could be going down the Weeb route and referring to what the anti-spiral race did in Gurren Lagann, placing their whole species into suspended animation, trying to avoid a hypothetical universe-ending event due to the overuse of spiral energy. But that's an end-of-the-universe topic for an anime iceberg. Entries here are hidden from the light for a reason. Even the prepared do not come out unchanged. All that comes up for this entry is the Big Crunch, which was already talked about, so I'm going to inject my own speculation about it. It may refer to a possibility that as the universe expands, the forces holding everything together, molecular bonds and such, will be pulled apart, causing everything to literally crumble. That's all I have for this entry. If you think you know what it's talking about, please let me know in the comments. Ice-9 is a material within the science fiction novel Cat's Cradle, written by this guy who I choose not to pronounce the last name of. Within the story, the material is described as a polymorph of ice, with a melting point of 114 Fahrenheit, 45 degrees Celsius. However, whenever Ice-9 comes into contact with liquid water below its own melting point, it acts as a seed crystal, causing solidification of the entire body of water. This, of course, results in humans who ingest it to be killed near instantly. Within the book, the worst comes to pass as the oceans are exposed to Ice-9, causing them to solidify, dooming life on Earth. This refers to a theory first proposed by Seymour Schlanger in 1976, in which Earth's oceans are depleted of dissolved oxygen. Geological records suggest that these events have happened in the past. Of course, the fallout of such an event would result in mass die-off of ocean life, which would cut off the food chain for many other creatures. It's theorized that in such an oceanic state, hydrogen sulfide gas, a toxic substance, was abundantly present, releasing into the atmosphere and suffocating plant and animal life. This gas may have been able to attack the ozone layer as well, increasing the UV light reaching Earth's surface. All around a really bad time. I mean, it's just the ceasing of This entry is based on a book by Arthur C. Clarke, in which Tibetan monks believe that if they compile all the names of God, this will fulfill the reason the universe exists, and God will then end existence. After getting a computer to speed up the process, and programmed by 2 Westerners, the task is near completion after 3 months. The programmers, while skeptical of the monks' goals, try to leave ahead of schedule to avoid the monks' displeasure with the machine, and by extension, programmers. After they reach the airfield to get a flight back home, they speculate that the computer should be done compiling the names using the alphabet the monks had created to assemble all the names of God. As they look up into the sky, they start to see the stars going out. And there we have it, my first foray into the Iceberg memes. Hopefully for longtime viewers, you enjoyed my indulgence, and for new viewers, hopefully you discovered a new channel to watch. Like I said, I might do more of these. I'm not sure. I have to find topics I'm interested in. If you have any suggestions, feel free to post them in the comments.